All right. So we are live again. Sorry to cut the conversation up. I got to stay on track. Okay. Okay, guys. I know it's 2 o'clock on the East Coast. It's 1 o'clock here right now, Enviroguard of Central States. But so what we're going to talk about here is breathable versus non-breathable coatings. And I did throw sealants into that just so that we're kind of having a complete conversation. When we talk about coatings, we're talking about an adherable product that sits on top of a surface. When we're talking about a sealant, we're talking about a product that penetrates a surface, okay? So to say like a penetrating sealant is really kind of a redundant use of terminology. So, but they oftentimes impart the same or similar qualities. So we're gonna kind of include that in our conversation, okay? One of the things you'll notice, this is a slide I took from our website, change the way your surface performs. Whenever you're thinking about a coating, you want it to do something. You might want it to be mold resistant, moisture resistant, breathable, non-breathable, flame retardant. There are like a lot of different things that you can get out of a coating or a sealant. So think about changing the characteristics of a surface. Wood surface, for example, can absorb moisture unless it's been treated with something. It can grow mold easily if it hasn't been treated for something. It can light on fire easily, but if you use an intumescent coating on it, not only will it keep flame from spreading on it, but it'll keep heat from passing through it, right? So there's a lot of different coatings and coating technologies that you can use to achieve or to change the characteristics of the way a surface performs. So that's what we're talking about here. Okay, so this is going to be very simple. We're going to talk about breathable versus non-breathable. Then kind of an extended little session on coating and sealant selection, right? We'll talk about the importance of a clean surface and then equipment that can be used to apply products as well. Okay, so these are just some rules of thumb. This isn't everything, but this is just a few things to keep in mind. One, if the surface can rot, it needs to breathe on at least one side, right? Meaning moisture has to be able to escape someplace or you're gonna run into a rot condition. I remember years ago when we started making coatings, the question then was always, is it breathable? Because so many encapsulants in our industry did not breathe well and would create wet or dry rot conditions, and that's a liability for anybody. Also, if the surface is over 15% moisture content, the coating applied must be breathable, right? So think about, well, any situation, post-water damage, post-fire damage, post-mold damage, whatever it might be, there's a likelihood that the moisture content of that surface was elevated at some point, right? And so we've got to make sure that we're getting, before we apply it for good curing, we've got to make sure that we've got that moisture content down some, generally at least 20% or less. But if you're at 15%, you still want to make sure that that coating is going to be breathable, because wood in a house is typically going to reach homeostasis, depending upon the area of the country, somewhere around 9%, right? So even if you're at 15%, you still probably have some moisture release to go, and you could end up creating a rot situation if the coating isn't breathable. And then for odor sealing, a sealer with a vapor permeance of less than 1 perm is absolutely necessary. Okay, a pet peeve of mine, probably because of the business that I'm in, is coatings manufacturers using acrylics to do the job of anything else. We were having a conversation here about shellacs before, right? Shellac does a great job in a oil-borne environment of preventing vapor from escaping. Why? Because that material makes that less than 1 perm rating when it comes to the way it's going to release moisture, or in this case, release a odor, right? Ongoing. So odor is kind of its own animal in this discussion, because you've got to always have low permeance, which means you got to know where your moisture content is, because we don't want to end up in a situation where we've got 20, 25% moisture content, then we seal it with a low perm coating for an odor situation and end up in a wet or dry rot condition, right? So just some parameters to be thinking about as you're selecting coatings and sealants for your jobs. Oh, the pet peeve is this. Acrylics, they're great products for a lot of different uses. We use acrylics in our MaxGuard products and things like that, but they're meant to breathe, right? And no matter how thick it goes on, it's always going to be a vapor permeable material, which means if it can release vapor, it can release odor. Okay. All right, so now we come to coating selection. The first one that we come to is we got our start with a coating like this at the Atlanta floods 10 plus years ago, I guess it is now, okay? And in particular, I recall working on a IEP-led job that was a huge apartment complex that had just been dried in, but nothing more, right? And those floods led to just pervasive mold in millions of square feet. And here's what we learned from the IEP working the job at the time. They wanted to see that a coating was on the surface, but they wanted to see the surface at the same time. They wanted to be inspected to know that they got back to a condition 1 environment and it just wasn't being covered up. And that, at the time, we called it frame protection, okay? Now it's called safeguard. But that was when we learned, man, there's this need for a semi-transparent coating. And that's exactly what you're seeing here, where this is a piece of OSB in the background, and you can see through this to know, has the surface been cleaned or has it not been cleaned? Now, the benefit of probably anybody watching this or here is that it also saves on some costs, because when coatings like this are going in, they're going in the building envelope. They're not being used in unconditioned spaces like crawl spaces, basements, attics, where moisture management is necessary 24/7, right? They're going into framing and the inside of sheathing and those sorts of things. And so, being the case, it actually provides the contractor with a less expensive product. And what that means is that when you turn around and you're using something like Exactimator or whatever, you become more profitable on those jobs overall. So just keep that in mind. It's just kind of a side benefit of a product that's not as expensive to manufacture. All right. Second one is ClearGuard. Moisture management in areas, especially where there's mechanicals and things of that nature, is always an issue. There's, of course, sometimes mechanical problems that are going on, not enough ventilation in soffits and roofs and things of that nature, but condensation due to heat, due to dew point differentials between night and day, especially in the wintertime, right? Where you've got sun beating down on a cold attic that gets hot during the day, then it freezes at night, back and forth, creates a lot of condensation issues, increases the moisture content. And for that, we have a unconditioned area product called ClearGuard, right? It looks natural on the surface. We've dulled the finish intentionally so that when it goes on, the look and texture of that looks just like there was never an issue in there, which is great for real estate transactions, right? You learn about all of this stuff and how it's all connected over time, but they do. A buyer's agent would love to come up into an attic and go, what was the problem? Why? Because they're going to negotiate against that issue. And we want to put our contractors in the best position to never have those problems and their customers, right? Because a lot of times you might be working for the seller and the buyer's trying to kind of work against that scenario, all right? So ClearGuard has, even though it's used and can be used in many other areas, crawl spaces and basements and any, interior areas as well, it's kind of famously used in attic spaces due to that issue. That brings us to MaxGuard. This is kind of our basement crawl space product because it is so bright white and opaque that it can just brighten up any area. So it has all the same benefits, and those benefits, breathability, moisture resistance, durability. There's one thing I haven't mentioned yet. In all of these guard products, our isothiazolone antimicrobial is used in that. That's our marine grade antimicrobial that's actually was used for the bottoms of ships to prevent fouling issues, so that ships would use less fuel, right? They would be more efficient, so they wouldn't have algae and things like that growing on them. Well, what's important about an antimicrobial used in a coating system like this is that mold won't grow on top of it, right? So if it can be submerged, you know that that antimicrobial is not going to bleed out of the coating system that it's treating, right? Because that's the part that's the EPA registered part that's very important. I'm not going to say most important because moisture resistance and breathability are all important aspects of it, but having the right antimicrobial to manage any sort of mold growth, bacterial growth, etc., on the surface is also critical. Okay, so the isothiazolone component of that is what we use in our product. And what that allows us to do is, as compared to most products out there that have a 20 wet mil specification on their warranty documents, which is 80 square feet per gallon, ours is 10 wet mils. Everybody familiar with wet mils? Let me grab a tool for you real quick and show you what this is. So a wet mil is a measure in wet form of the thickness of a coating. And they look like, kind of like a credit card, right? Let me pass a couple of these out. Yeah. So this is called a wet mil gauge. And for anybody who is seeing this for the first time here, a wet mil gauge has teeth on it, and those teeth tell us the wet millage that's on the surface. So naturally, the way that it is used is, if this is our surface, right? This piece of paper is our surface, then we can apply the coating to the surface, tap it to the surface, and know exactly how many wet mils we have on there. What happens is the technician will develop visual acuity to what that should look like, but this is the reference along the way as they're doing a job to make sure they're on spec, especially initially until they know what it should look like on a surface. Because if I just told you, hey, apply this to 10 wet mils, you'd be like, okay, dude, whatever, right? But it's important that we have a guideline. Otherwise, how do you know that your product's going to work, right? Is it going to work at 1 wet mil the same it does at 10, the same it does at 20? Who knows, right? But if you follow the manufacturer's specifications to the wet millage that's on that, so 20 wet mils is equivalent to 80 square feet per gallon. The standard number to get to how many square feet per gallon, if you know the wet millage, is 1,600, okay? So 1,600 divided by 20 is 80. That tells you it's 80 square feet per gallon. Ours is 10 wet mils. 10 divided by 1,600 is 160, which is 800 square feet per 5-gallon pail. So the way that you know two things, what your cost is, and are you going to be profitable on it, is based upon your wet mill specification and nothing else. Otherwise, you are just playing Russian roulette, if you will, with your coating application, and you're happy if you make money, and if you don't, you're like, what happened? What was the problem? This little tool makes you profitable. Okay?
But that's only the initial applying it.
Right. Correct. Yep. Once it cures, right, this is where, right. So if you're not using a tool like this right now, then you have no idea like what all your past jobs were. You're just, kind of willy-nilly, looks good. That doesn't tell you a whole lot, right? And as I'm going to show you in the next photo, I want everybody to see, and by the way, everybody out there, we're using this step-by-step guide. It's called Controlling Structural Moisture and Mold in Unconditioned Spaces with MaxGuard and ClearGuard. You can consider this like a general protocol. It's available in WorkDrive, so if you have access to WorkDrive or if you need it, hit us up at info@enviroguarddirect.com and we'll get you a link to that. Okay, so this shows you what ClearGuard, I said, it's going to look like a natural surface. That's ClearGuard on a pallet, okay? Because some of the most difficult wood to kind of clean, number one, and number two, because there's so many knots in it, so you can kind of see what coverages look like, is pallet wood, right? Because it's cheap wood. So that's what ClearGuard looks like on the surface. There's no sheen or anything. That's what Safeguard looks like. And if you were to see that alone, you would go, well, that's not very semi-transparent until you look at what MaxGuard looks like next to it. Then you can go, oh yeah, I can tell that if there was a mold issue that's still present there, I would be able to see it with Safeguard, right? So just depending upon where you are and what you're trying to accomplish, I wanted to show what those three products look like on an actual surface. These are all applied at 10 wet mils initially, okay? So on spec what that surface is going to look like exactly. Then we get into some interesting territory with like new construction. New construction is a bigger opportunity than we ever knew, not only from the remedial side, from kind of like the lumber yard to dry-in, where there might be some need for remediation. But here's what we know about builders. Builders are not about spending more money on their projects. They are about making more money and differentiating themselves on their projects. And Safeguard provides the right price point, quite frankly, from a marketing standpoint, where you can go in and be profitable on a frame treat, right? Treating a full house, so that from dry-in to the next 15 years, it's guaranteeing they're not going to have a mold problem in that framing, but where they can make a 50% margin on that installation as well and differentiate themselves. So we're building this system right now with builders in various areas of the country, like up in Baltimore, Maryland, and different things. If it becomes something that's interesting, let us know, because it's one of those things where we would focus with you on it, because putting together the right marketing, for their website and collateral and things of that nature with co-branding becomes part of the overall initiative, which also from them to us says that on 100% of their builds, like if we're going to do that, they're going to build with us 100% of the time, right? It's kind of, you can't have your cake and eat it too.
So I've got a question about new construction.
Yep.
So do any of the builders immediately say, well, why would I need this product because it's treated lumber?
Yeah.
So
sure.
What's our answer to that?
Yeah. The answer is, well, some of the wood is treated, right? Probably the foundation wood, or up in the attic systems and things like that, but not all wood, right? So it's just as likely that you're going to have an inner wall condensation issue from dew point, and from that being a sealed cavity in the cavity itself, which for all intents and purposes is dry until you have heat impacting the outside and air conditioning on the inside converging in a wall someplace, as you would be having a condensation issue in an attic or otherwise.
More or less just like an insurance policy.
Absolutely. It's an insurance policy for them and a profit center. Yeah, and a differentiator. Yep. So that's what the part of what the new construction market looks like. We also see this as a rising need, and that is commercial ceilings, where we need to meet that black specification, but have a moisture and mold resistant system in the ceiling versus just plain paint, right? So when you're up high, heat rises. Condensation issues are created, especially because, again, you've got ductwork. Air conditioning is running through that steel ductwork, creating condensation, cooling, hot air, cool air, converges, condensation, moisture content rises, things like that. Okay, so it's just all pragmatic stuff centering on dew point, right? But we have to know where all of those areas are that are problem areas. Okay, so then we get to post-disaster passive moisture controls with Fortify. I had mentioned this earlier, and the reason we made this a water-thin, more of a sealant type of product is we realized that when you're in a post-disaster situation, every piece of equipment has to be able to work for you, right? You can't have a thick coating and then not be able to apply it with a pump-up sprayer or something like that. It's not compatible. So we designed this as that insurance policy for the contractor. So when you're turning and burning and moving very quickly, this can be like the final treatment of a house, even if you do have a slightly elevated moisture content before build back. Then we've got foundation, block filling, and seepage control. Okay, our masonry guard product was built to be able to resist up to 23 psi of hydrostatic pressure while still remaining breathable, meaning that we won't trap moisture in behind a block wall or something of that nature, so vapor can transmit out into the environment. But at the same time, we've got the seepage control side of things going on. And many times, this almost becomes as aesthetic as anything else, where people want to just make the basement look better or something like that. And then along with that, we've got some complementary products. One of them would be Enviroseal. So efflorescence forms because you have sodium hydroxide calcium hydroxide that is present in all concrete mixes. And because it's water soluble, over time, that the moisture that's coming from the positive to the negative side of the wall is drawing that calcium hydroxide to the surface, and those deposits form, right? It's a mineral deposit. That can be prevented by using our silicated Enviroseal product. Then that surface can be sealed, and what it does is it cross-links with that calcium hydroxide, and it becomes calcium silicate, okay? It just converts the molecule and bonds through a covalent bond, turns it into calcium silicate, and now water can't migrate it to the surface anymore, okay? So it works as well as a densifier or redensifier for concrete, right, to shore up those voids that have filled over time from efflorescence, as it does to prevent it in general, okay? So that's our Enviroseal product. Then, maybe conversely, but just as importantly, things like wind-driven rain, freeze-thaw damage in all exterior porous materials, especially brick and mortar, stone and mortar, ethos, stucco, you kind of name it, aggregate materials on commercial structures, suck up a lot of moisture, and it reduces the life expectancy of those surfaces, even just from repeated, wind and rainstorms and things like that. This is a wall at my house, actually, as you enter the garage. And I had intentionally allowed this thing from freeze-thaw damage and everything I just listed to fall apart on me. And then we went and redid the wall 3 years ago, okay? I've treated it once with X4. And this is a picture I just took 2 weeks ago on my driveway during a rainstorm. And you can't see it really well here, but every single part of this remains dry, right? Moisture just does not penetrate these surfaces. So you just think about everything from walkways and driveways and exteriors of homes and everything else, and you can really put together substantial services on just repelling moisture from those surfaces to extend the life of them. It is a phenomenal product. You would call it a water repellent product, except it's really seriously made as a sealer that penetrates, and it just becomes a part of the entire surface. Its life expectancy, depending upon a lot of environmental factors, 7 to 15 years. So it's a very durable product.
So I have a question on that. So we're talking about a wall.
Yep.
You put that on, and it's obviously repelling the water.
Yep.
So if I'm on a wall and it's here,
yep,
it's going down.
Yep.
Is that going to lead to something structurally on the bottom where all that moisture goes, or is there something that I don't know?
Yeah. Yeah, for the most part, a lot of these walls are just going to drop right into a yard, into a garden bed, or something like that, right? This one drops onto a driveway, and it just the moisture flows away from the wall. So I haven't had any, or seen, or heard of any issues like that.
Because like some older homes that have this type on there, it may be on a driveway or whatever.
Yep.
But because the earth spins and temperatures go up and down,
right,
concrete is going to move this way and this way.
Yep. Yep.
So I guess if it separates a little bit, and moisture gets underneath it, is there something that we need to do on the outside of those walls to reduce these small cracks or gaps to prevent that? Because once water gets underneath there,
right, under a driveway or something like that, yeah,
it's like an ice cube. It's going to expand. So
right,
you can put all this on the front of that wall, but if it's expanding on the bottom side, yeah, you may not have any moisture there, but if there's anything underneath,
right,
it's going to
Right. So let me just translate this so that everybody can kind of hear the question. The question is, if you had a wall, and let's say it's coming down onto a driveway, and you get some separation over time at that driveway, either the concrete rises, sinks, moves away from it, whatever it might be. If water from this moving down the wall is getting underneath that driveway, is there something that could be done about that to offset that potential problem?
As you're applying this, to see that problem for obviously another product or
Right.
another procedure.
Okay, so the answer could be, okay, because you know how we're working on these products on the construction side, right? A liquid applied moisture control over there. A couple of years ago, I was working with a major international restoration company. It begins with a B. And we were doing this huge project on a slope. And the water not only was coming, it was one of these developments where water was coming into the buildings because when you took away the sheetrock, you were like, oh my gosh, there's no sheathing or anything. I'm seeing brick and mortar and sometimes no mortar, right? So there's one problem. But the other problem is that as moisture was accumulating into the soil, all of those expansion joints, water was coming up through those expansion joints as well. What we did was we took a 1-part moisture cure resin and we filled all those up, right? And it expands, and the moisture within that is what cures it. And then for 24 hours, we ran water around just to make sure nothing came back up. Something like that could work really well. Yeah.
But I mean, that's just knowing how things get constructed and how they're put together.
Right.
And a lot of these things aren't reconstructed.
Right.
And they are. So
that's
there's
right.
more factors than just putting something on
right.
a wall or a surface. You've got to look
10
steps ahead.
Right.
To understand that.
Where does the water go from here to here to there?
Like, okay, you're going to put that on there. So what's my real benefit from doing it?
Right.
You know, I'd rather know up front. Well, if we do this, and we've seen this problem.
Right.
It also means to do excellent.
Right. Now, I've never seen the problem or heard about the problem before, but I could see how it could be a potential.
It happens a lot around
Yeah.
here.
Okay.
Foundation.
And it might also be because of different soils, like we were talking about earlier. Yep. Okay, so that's wind-driven. By the way, the test for this, it's easy to pre-test and post-test on these things. Anytime I have something that kind of approximates like clearance, I love it. So we use what's called a Rylem tube. A Rylem tube is kind of like a column of water that looks like a test tube and it turns 90 degrees into a surface. And at 5 mils in there, it gives you an approximate 98 mile per hour wind speed of moisture, okay, into that surface. So you know what a Category 2 hurricane, how the surface is going to perform under duress of a Category 2 hurricane, okay, automatically with that test. So if moisture wicks into that surface, and the test is a 20-minute long surface, and all the moisture goes in, you've got a super porous surface that's absorbing a lot of moisture, which means that the life expectancy of that surface is going to be dramatically impacted by moisture. On the other side of it, your ongoing test is the same sort of thing, so that you know when to retreat as well, so that 7 years out, 10 years out, whatever it might be, if you maybe turn this into some sort of an annual inspection program. Like in our area, we've got a ton of crawl spaces. So a normal annual service is like come in and inspect a crawl space for gaps and things like that in the vapor barrier, change out filters and make sure the dehumidifier is running properly, all those little things. And you could add this to a service. So in any area of the country, different services may be more or less popular than others, but I could see tying something like that into an overall annual service or maintenance program. Okay, then we get over to the soot, odor, smoke damage side of things. This could be inclusive of like animal odors and things. Emory University over in Atlanta specified our vapor lock products because their clock tower over there got infested with birds, and they couldn't even have people in those offices anymore. The stench was so bad, right? And so they specified vapor lock 10 years ago, 12 years ago, whatever it is. And so we're specified actually with the university themselves. Ohio State University specified vapor lock for use in their in their buildings. So this Vapor Lock White can be used to prime a surface. It can also be used to cover any staining that you have, but of course its primary use is to seal in odor. So even after odor removal, let's say we're in a fire job or something like that, well, through the heat and pressures of a fire, of course, odor gets embedded into that surface. So even though you might do the soot cleanup and odor mitigation, let's say with chlorine dioxide, so it smells good right now, boy, those surfaces begin to open up in summertime and things like that, then that smoke odor comes back, okay? And so Vapor Lock is the water-based alternative to like a shellac product, like a Zinsser bin or something of that nature. What it gives you is a non-VOC product. In other words, there's no gases or vapors coming off of the product. It's water cleanup only, right? So you don't have to worry about solvents to clean up your airless sprayers and those sorts of things. Yeah, it's just an easy product to work with overall. So that is Vapor Lock White. And then to complement that, we have the Vapor Lock Clear. This is me. And what we found with Vapor Lock Clear is a lot of times you're going to have surfaces that are affected by odor, but there's nothing visibly wrong with it, right? So you could have a whole house that's smoke damage. Why do all of the tear out and things of that nature if we can just seal those walls up fairly easily with a clear product that goes right over the paint that's already there, right? So after a wipe down of those walls to remove any soot deposits and those sorts of things, probably with chlorine dioxide as well to mitigate any of the odor that's just sitting on the surface, we can clear coat that with Vapor Lock Clear.
Is it better if you roll that on or spray it?
I sprayed it on and then back rolled it, right? Because if you don't back roll it, it's a little thinner, and it'll develop some drips and things like that. But it's very highly sprayable, so it's good to spray on and then back roll.
Does it leave a glossy stain?
No.
Mm-hmm. You paint over it after it dries?
Yes. Yep.
Without priming.
Without priming it. Yep. Both products are self-priming. Yep. Okay. All right. So then that leads us kind of to the importance of a clean surface. So why do you want a clean surface when it comes to coatings and sealants? First is adhesion, right? If you've got anything in the way of adhesion, it's going to reduce the life expectancy of the coating itself, which is, costly. Second is performance, right? Over time, if you start getting bubbles and, it's popping and things of that nature on the surface because you didn't clean the surface, again, it just becomes a liability. And then the whole longevity side of things, we expect our coatings to last on the surface a minimum of 15 years. Well, if that's the case, then you shouldn't be having problems like 2 years into it, right? But you could easily have problems if you didn't clean the surface to begin with. So I thought I would just mention, like, all of this is assuming a clean surface to begin with. Okay, and then we'll talk about equipment. For coatings and sealants, the primary piece of equipment that will allow it to go on fastest is the airless sprayer. I know that James has an airless sprayer here. There are differences in airless sprayers. Airless sprayers are typically rated based upon the number of expected hours of use per year. So something like this system here may only be actually rated, even though it looks like a commercial unit from a Lowe's or something like that. I believe that unit is only rated for 50 hours a year. 50 hours a year is not a lot of hours a year, right? Which is why when people start having problems with a $500 or $600 sprayer, they're like, I spent $500. Okay, let's compare this to professional grade equipment that's going to cost you $2,500, but where every year you're going to have those seals repacked for $100, and that thing's going to last you 10, 20 years out, right? So expect to have problems with a big box sprayer. I'm telling you right now, if it's $500 or $600, it's a cheap airless sprayer. Okay, so the airless sprayers that are in that range of $2,000 to $3,000, those things have tremendous life expectancy. They're rated for thousands of hours of use per year, and they're not throwaway, right? Something from Lowe's or Home Depot, I can tell you, is a throwaway sprayer in our field if you're using it on a weekly basis. All right, tips. Okay, tips are rated kind of like the tips that we talked about with pump sprayers and BTM and things of that nature. Similar type of thing here. So this tip right here, you can see, is a 311. Okay, the 3 is your width. In this case, you take the 3, multiply it by 2, and it gives you 6, and that means 12 inches from the surface, you're going to get 6 inches of coverage. You would think that they wouldn't care about like the multiplication. They would just name it a 6 to begin with, so you didn't have to think about it. But this is the system that we're stuck with. So whatever the first number is here, multiply it by 2, and 12 inches from the surface, that's your spray pattern. Your 11 is 11 hundredths of an inch, and it always goes in odd numbers. 9 hundredths of an inch, 11 hundredths of an inch, 13 hundredths of an inch, 15 hundredths. 15 hundredths and 17 hundredths of an inch are the standards that you'll get typically when you buy a sprayer from a Lowe's or a Home Depot. It'll have one or the other in there, and it's a good center point. The problem with those products, I don't mean to be ragging on them or anything, because they have their uses, especially if you're just getting into business and you don't want to spend $2,500 on an air sprayer and you want to get $25,000 under your belt for the cash flow of your company. Understandable. But once you get into bigger tips and you want to do heavier coatings, like I can tell you, like the coatings that we will be putting out to for like doing for like roof systems and all these sorts of things that we're working on right now, or to be the house wrap replacement but in a liquid format, those will all require somewhere between a low 20, right? So instead of a 11 on the backside there, it'll be like 21 hundredths of an inch, probably up to maybe 33 hundredths of an inch, which is a much larger orifice size, because with those, this is going to blow you away, because we were talking about like 10 wet mills and things like that. In a lot of those coatings, we're going to be applying those at 30 to 60 wet mills. And those are going to be products that are 80+% solids content. They're almost pure solids. So your viscosity, everything is measured in centipoise. Like MaxGuard might be around 10,000 centipoise. These are going to be like 50,000 centipoise, like 5 times the thickness. So we won't be able to use systems from Lowe's and Home Depot and things of that nature for their application. It'll require a truly professional rig to apply those coatings. But I want to mention how that tip system works and how to know, like you can get tips that are a 12, like a 12, 19, okay? So that would mean 12 inches from the surface, you're spraying a 24-inch spray pattern, just 12 inches from the surface, right? It's going whoosh, like that. And you're doing that at 19 hundredths of an inch, right? So you got a lot of product that you're putting on that surface because it's so broad, but yet you still have good control and you're not putting on too much. So just know that you've got that variability to become much more efficient. Don't think that you're stuck with an out-of-the-box tip. If you've got a broad wall, if we were doing these walls right here, I would have a 12, 19 or something like that all day long, and we would go, we would have, of course, everything in place so we could do it, but we would just work our way across that, and in a matter of minutes, we would have this thing sprayed out as compared to, the many, many, many minutes that it would take if we were just working with something with a much narrower fan pattern. Okay, blending. You always want to blend, especially your coatings, anything that's a suspension where you've got solids and liquids coming together. So anything that's paint inconsistency, you want to blend it first, not only so that it's uniform, okay, because they can separate over time, but also so you break the surface tension, right? Because even if it's perfectly blended, as a coating sits in a bucket, it actually gets thicker. And then when you blend it, it breaks that surface tension so you don't cavitate your pump, okay? Because you could go, like, what's happening? Why isn't this thing priming? Well, the reason is you just didn't take a moment to blend that and break that surface tension. Literally, that surface tension gets broken in 10 seconds. Okay, we talked about the importance of a wet film thickness gauge, how it's used. I don't think we need to recover that. Any questions on that stuff? That's our question area. How did we do? A little bit longer that time. Any questions on the coatings and across this breathable versus non-breathable? Makes sense to everybody? Any questions over there?
Were any of the coatings that you discussed today the ones you would be using house wrap? You mentioned that a few times.
They are related to it. So everything there will be acrylic because breathability is important on a house wrap product. But we have the formulation that we're finishing right now. And the difference with those is it's going to be the first time because a lot of those things will then have like warranties, like 25-year warranties and stuff like that. It's the first time that we're doing a full factory certification of those products. Right now, any contractor can come along and buy MaxGuard or whatever. We only sell to contractors, but in the future, it's going to be a certified contractor who's using all of those systems. But what that will come with is not only the hands-on training of how to, and then the contractor showing us how to and testing on that, but then the how-to on how to market it and how to sell it. So it'll come with a full sales system. We released our sales system at the last Market Makers, which we were talking about before. And then we'll make sure that everybody's trained so that they have the assessment guides and everything to go along with that. And they know how to put together an accomplish list during the sales transaction and everything else. So it will come fully packed out with A to Z, how to apply it, how to know that you're applying it right, how to market it properly and with us and co-branding, those sorts of things, and then how to sell it. And we'll be doing the pricing together and all those models.
All right.
Yeah. So it's a big jump for us, and that's why it's launching next March is because we're sneaking up on it, week by week, month by month, so everything's in place for March.
Really cool idea.
Yeah. Yep. And then that certification system will then begin to wrap back around because part of that cert is that we want it to all be tied back into like ICRC continuing education credits. And eventually, because of our new facility out there, and because we're kind of between a lot of major cities, we'd like to then invite the ICRC in to begin training their primary courses with us as well, and then start kind of doing that with all of our locations around the country, is playing host to events like that and really being tied in. So that's kind of the big picture. Yeah.
From the big picture of that, to get certified in that, is there initial cost for that?
I don't know right now, right? As we're working our way through it, and like Market Makers, for example, has a cost associated with it, but to this point, it's only been nominal, right? To cover, like, because when people come in, we just cover all the food and everything associated with the event, and we all come together from a Market Maker standpoint to better one another's businesses. So we kind of just play host to it. We don't even feel like we're there to sell anything as much as just share best practices and to make sure we perpetuate good ideas forward more than anything. This is going to change it a little bit because if somebody's going to be there for Market Makers, we might as well make good use of that time, even if it takes an extra day, and run a certification course with it. So I don't know yet. Yeah.
Because if you're a distributor, and you're obviously wanting to sell more of this product, and you're in an area like this, you'd want more than one person to be certified to use it, just for profits.
It's going to be a balance, right? You don't want too many people.
You don't want to saturate it.
Right. So it's going to be a balance. We've got some time and some learning to do between now and then to be able to answer that question, but I couldn't give you an answer today. But we're not going to do anything dumb. We'll be talking to a lot of people about the way they, in other industries, run their certification programs between now and then, and learning for a water hose as usual. Okay, well, we are approaching quarter of, so I'm going to go ahead and get busy here, prepping for the next session, and we'll see you in 15 minutes.